Good blessings, guys. Jesus is the way and the truth and the life, and no man cometh unto the Father but through him. Now, in this video, I want to discuss matters pertaining to a court case that is now in the Civil Court of Appeal. It has no place in the Civil Court of Appeal. What they're trying to do is a Frankenstein effort, and the reason it's a Frankenstein effort is very simple. There are criminal convictions involved, and what they're trying to do is focus on the civil aspect of how they came about, and at the same time overturn the quashing of those convictions whilst operating outside of a criminal jurisdiction in a civil jurisdiction within the Court of Appeal. So what you can't do is you can't touch on criminal convictions without dealing with them in a criminal jurisdiction. So they're still ignoring jurisdiction in these proceedings. And they're not allowing the jurisdiction to, as it should, limit the remit within which a matter must remain. And what they're now trying to do is fail to address matters of a criminal nature, but by jurisdiction, but actually address them indirectly. And this is a problem because, and this is why the problem began in the first place, and why it exposed an unconstitutional nature inherent in the formation of the section 115 and 117 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006 and 113 and 114 also, because they frame 115 and 117 in meaning and definition and mechanism, saying that guards have jurisdiction in civil matters where they don't. They never do, they never can, and any legislature that says they do is treasonous because it goes against all the basic fundaments and precepts of Western society and of law. Necessary precepts and fundaments such as presumption of innocence, impartiality, jurisdiction, due process of law, everyone held equal before the law, due process of law. You cannot give a cease and desist order without something having gone through due process of court. But they're saying these adult behaviour warnings have the power of a cease and desist, in that there's the apprehension that if you don't stop doing what they've said that you should stop doing, even though they haven't been in a position to tell you that you've been conducting yourself in an unlawful way, that there's the apprehension that you will be summoned to a civil jurisdiction where they shouldn't be operating. So now they're saying, we will give you a sort of a trepidation and apprehension that we're going to come back here and give you this non-cease and desist adult behaviour warning, pretending it has the power of a cease and desist, in that if you fail to comply with it, even though it's not requesting you to stop doing anything unlawful, we will summons you to a civil court where we should not be operating. So you better stop, or we'll break the law because you haven't. Because we have to give the impression that you're doing something wrong here, even though we can't arrest you. So do you see how they've really blurred the lines between jurisdictions, between civil jurisdiction and criminal jurisdiction? If a guard comes to me and he says, you're not breaking the law, but we have a problem. We have a big problem. Because the guard can't stop you doing something that's lawful, and he surely can't give you a cease and desist order without bringing a matter before a judge in the criminal court. He simply can't. He's nothing to do with civil matters. Nothing whatsoever. The guard has nothing to do with civil matters. He should never be in a civil court, let alone trying to prosecute somebody in a civil court. Let alone picking and choosing, showing bias, who he's going to represent, even though he wasn't the one that gathered any evidence, nor does he have any solid irrefutable evidence, that you have in any way operated unlawfully, so to bring you before a court. By the way, he shouldn't be in a civil court, and therefore can't bring you before it. And you certainly can't be brought before a civil court when what he's telling you to stop doing is not unlawful. Why would a guard be trying to summons you to a civil court where he has no jurisdiction to prosecute you, showing bias towards a group of people, basically conspiring with them as a mob, going against the laws of the land, bringing them and you into a civil court where he's going to pick and choose who he's going to represent, even though he has no solid irrefutable evidence, and he's not representing of any of his own evidence that he has accumulated as a result of an investigatory work. So here's a guard, basically a superintendent or higher, the legislature says, that is acting on behalf of his underlings, of guards of a lesser rank, guards plural, because you've had to have a number of these adult behaviour warnings given to you in order to be brought before the civil court by a guard? No, this is basically unlawful. It's foregoing presumption of innocence. Why? The guard has to presume you're innocent. So how can he bring you before a civil court if he's got to presume you're innocent? How can he summons you if he can't show that you've done anything unlawful? Because there's no such thing as lawful antisocial behaviour. Do you see the point? You can keep doing what you're doing, you're not breaking the law in any way, but you better stop doing what you're doing because the adult behaviour says you should. But what's the adult behaviour warning? Well, it's nothing more than headed paper, basically. It says adult behaviour warning on it. We take a complaint from a member of the public about you, we write it down and we sign it, and then tell you to stop doing something that we can't arrest you for doing because it's perfectly lawful and a right that is constitutionally protected, and so we can't come against you in any way lawfully, so we're going to try to do so in a civil jurisdiction where we shouldn't be operating because we don't want to appear powerless against the preacher of God who's conducting himself lawfully. They're totally exposed in this. Guards should not be operating in a civil jurisdiction, period. If you ask one on the side of the street, they'll tell you that. So why is the legislature contradictory of what the guard is taught in Templemore, the training facility, where guards are trained in Templemore in Ireland, where my own father was trained as a guard, my own dad? They're taught, no, we've no jurisdiction in civil matters. They're taught that in Templemore. So they come out on the street armed with that, and then a politician, no training in the law, comes and starts legislating otherwise. And nobody takes them up on it. Nobody nips that in the bud. Says, you can't do that. And the judge of the district court says, I must assume it's lawful. Why? What did you go to college for then? If you've got to assume that things are lawful simply because they're legislated for, what's the point in you sitting in that seat? Why did you go to college to learn the law? Why do guards go to Templemore if they're not going to uphold the office they're given and paid to maintain and occupy? Everybody held equal before the law. How is I held equal before the law if the guard is picking and choosing who he's going to represent in a civil jurisdiction with the apprehension that failure to do what that civil court orders you as a result of being prosecuted by a guard in a civil jurisdiction, which should never happen, might prevent you from engaging your rights that a guard has told you you're perfectly within your rights to continue doing. Otherwise, there'd be no opportunity for a second adult behaviour warning to be given. Why? Because you should have been arrested. Because if you were breaking the law, they shouldn't be telling you should stop breaking the law before they arrest you. If I was breaking the law for 3 years, doing the same thing, preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ in the Bullring in Wexford, don't you think the guards were a little bit slow to react? No, they were rooting, trying to find a way to stop me preaching the gospel because the local people didn't like what I was talking about. They didn't like that I was exposing abortion. Why? Well, they might know somebody who had an abortion. So what? The way the laws are in Ireland says that you can talk about what you want to talk about in public, so long as it's not inciting violence or obscene. You can talk about it. So long as it's not inciting violence, like saying, all this type of people should be killed or all that type of people should be left out or charged more. Exactly what Tesco are doing at the moment, charging some people more for an item than others. And why aren't the guards arresting them? Why aren't the Human Rights and Equality Commission going over there and saying, sorry, you can't discriminate against this person over that simply because this one has affiliated or associated with you by way of downloading an app or applying for a club card. Sorry, you can't charge this person more. That's discriminatory. So here they are creating these subgroups within businesses, big corporate entities, and the Human Rights and Equality Commission are saying nothing about that. But they want to get involved in matters pertaining to freedoms of expression and freedoms of speech. And they're entitled to do so. They're entitled to get involved, and I would encourage the general public to get involved in this, because it's basically one politician who remains unnamed and unknown legislated for sections 113, 114, 115 and 117 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006, which go against the rights of the Irish person and go against jurisdiction, impartiality, presumption of innocence and due process of law. They see guards summonsing people on the basis of a complaint, conspiring together because guards would have to go on different days to give different adult behaviour warnings for potentially different reasons. And so now they're compiling all of these adult behaviour warnings against you and saying, well, now you've had number 3, number 4, number 5, and we have to bring you before the court. Why? You've been remiss. If you told me to stop doing something unlawful, that would be fine. One could understand why a guard would say, look, I didn't know if you knew, but this is unlawful. So as a matter of, trying to set you on your way and set you right, don't do this again. That would be different. But when somebody comes and says, you must stop doing this, even though what they're telling you to stop doing is perfectly lawful, because they've told you that, the guard comes over and he says, look, you're not breaking the law, but... No, as soon as you go into that area, the guard, you're breaking the law. Once you start saying you're not breaking the law, but you should stop doing this because, you're now trying to find reasons to incite me to break the law. Which means that you're breaking the law. Because if you're inciting me to find a reason, to find a rationale or a logical reason that goes against the law, why I should stop engaging my freedoms, now you're trying to educate me wrongly, telling me that I'm doing something wrong, while at the same time you're telling me I'm doing something right. So which is it? Am I breaking the law or am I behaving properly? Because if I'm not breaking the law, you shouldn't be telling me to stop doing what I'm doing when I'm not breaking the law. Because now you're trying to educate me to ill effect. You're trying to incite me to fail to know my rights, which is the exact opposite of your office. Your office is to uphold my rights, and that also includes educating me on what they are. So you should be forthcoming as a guard and say, you're not breaking the law. You haven't broken the law. And then when people come against you, your reasoning shouldn't be, but they keep calling the Garda station and it's becoming a problem. Well, then you need to tell them to stop calling the guards. We have something in place to prevent that. It's called wasting police time. It's a serious offence. So that you can't just keep calling up the Garda station to order a pizza. That's seen as serious because those lines have to be open for matters where the guards are actually required. But now we have business owners who simply don't agree with you complaining about you to guards. Then that's the opportunity of the guard to educate that member of the public. Sorry, that's not what we're here to do. We're not here to play agony aunt to you or represent your worldview or your opinions. We're here to make sure that you can have them. We're not here to prevent anybody from having one that's opposite to yours. That's not why we're here. We're here to ensure that both of you can have your opinions and not incite harm against each other. Both of you can have your opinions and not be violent towards each other. Both of you can have your opinions and that's seen as acceptable for you to voice them. It's not only okay for you to have your opinion if it's opposite to somebody else's, but it's okay for you to voice them if it's if they're opposite to somebody else's. So if you're against Christianity in Ireland, it's your right to come out and say why. That is your right, and that's a right afforded by the grace of God. Because God has protected your free will by his mighty power. So you have in Ireland a free will to express yourself. That extends both to the secular non-Christian and to the Christian. That right is all across the board. But it doesn't allow people who would be, say, paedophiles to come out and say, we're going to campaign for pro-paedophile legislation. They're breaking the laws. This is trying to incite the society to do something that's unlawful. And this is why same-sex marriage shouldn't have been campaigned for, because it's unlawful. This is why abortion shouldn't have been campaigned for, because it's unlawful. It's like saying, let's bring a referendum to allow people to shoot each other. Oh, should we bring that for referendum? No, why? It's against the law. So now you're inciting people to break the law by campaigning to change legislature that has been the same for thousands of years and acceptably seen as something that's harmful towards society. And now society, through the media, is trying to tell people and use a heavy hand in telling people that, no, actually, to come out here and tell us we're doing wrong is not allowed. But at the same time, we'll have a forked tongue and we'll tell you, you have these rights, but not in application. You have these rights, but as soon as you try to do them, we'll start coming against you in ways that are nonsensical and corrupt, using legislatures that really have been formed in a treasonous manner. So we're going to come against your rights and freedoms instead of upholding them. And that's what the Guards are now doing. The Guards are now being incited to come against the rights of the individual in Ireland. In a court case called Stephen Tallon versus the DPP, the courts are now failing to uphold jurisdiction, failing to prevent members of An Garda Síochána coming in and getting involved in civil matters, to eventually criminalise a person for failing to comply with a civil order that was brought together on the basis of something that shouldn't have occurred. Guards should never have been allowed in to a civil court to prosecute somebody, showing partiality and bias in representing one group over another. They don't have any jurisdiction, and they certainly can't show bias whether they're in jurisdiction or out of it. There has to be a presumption of innocence, so they can't assume that you're in the wrong, so to take up the position to prosecute you. Especially not in a civil matter where they have no jurisdiction. Guards are only permitted to bring evidence. That's all they're allowed to do. Accumulate and present evidence. Now there's two types of evidence: solid irrefutable evidence and prima facie evidence. Prima facie evidence is evidence that is at face value. It's brought at face value. It's hearsay, basically, because the guard is just saying, I heard this and I'm repeating it. Or, so there are a number of situations. The guard might be claiming that he saw something. That still can't be assumed as being the truth by a judge. Even if the guard is saying he saw it himself, the judge can't assume the guard is telling the truth. He also can't accuse him of lying unless he has reason to. So, hearsay in and of itself, whether it's given by a guard or another party in the court, a civilian, it cannot be assumed as 100% truth. So, in and of itself, prima facie evidence or hearsay, or basically just the testimony of a person, cannot lead in and of itself and alone to the criminalization or conviction of an individual. So there has to be solid irrefutable evidence to ground the accusation, to give it some foundation that is provable in a way that is irrefutable. It's not just he said, she said. That won't amount to a criminalization or a criminal conviction of a person. And when it does, we have exposed a problem, a decay, and something that must be removed from legislature. We've shown misconduct. We've shown legislature that allows for misconduct. We've shown a corruption of our system, a perversion and a decay of it, which in the way that it doesn't preserve, that legislature doesn't preserve the presumption of innocence, impartiality, which are closely related. Impartiality, presumption of innocence. Why? Because you can't presume somebody's guilty and be impartial at the same time. And you can't presume they're not guilty and be partial at the same time. Choosing to believe what somebody has said and not what the other person has said is not allowed for a guard to do. And it can't result in his presentation being based merely upon his own opinion. He has to give solid irrefutable evidence. He has to show that his mens rea, his thinking to bring him to the conclusion that he has drawn, has been based on solid irrefutable evidence to show that he's operating properly as a member of An Garda Síochána in his office and functioning properly, as is expected of him by the reasonableness and harmlessness of law and constitution. So if a guard has strayed away from engaging his office in a way that is considered lawful, he is now acting unlawfully. He should be quickly reprimanded. He should be quickly told, you can't do that. And it should be an edification for him, an opportunity to be improved. He should never be endowed in his error. Just like a politician should never be endowed in their error and allow it to go on. Just like a judge should never play ignorance or play, I'm just a subservient district court judge. I just have to do what the legislator says. No, that's not the case. You have certain very specific and vital precepts and fundaments that your seat is set upon as a judge that you must uphold and preserve. And it doesn't matter whether a legislator has come and put something in motion, to contradict that or come against that. You have to uphold your office and your oath of office and those expectations that are placed upon your office when you see that something is going against those fundamental precepts which preserve everybody's rights. Preserving people's rights requires proper function in the courts. Why? Because a court judge who's acting unlawfully can target one individual, which what? It doesn't afford him the same rights as everybody else. If that judge fails to uphold his office on the day when that person's involved, he hasn't been treated fairly before the law. He hasn't been treated equally before the law, and therefore he hasn't been afforded due process of law or court. So he hasn't been treated properly. That means that depending on the judge, he's going to choose to side with the legislator who's basically breaking the law in what he's legislated, and come against the individual person he chooses to come against, but endow the other one he doesn't come against with their full spectrum of rights in another court case. So in one court case he won't comply with his office and he'll blame the legislator, and in another one he will comply with his office and he won't even tip his cap to the legislator, depending on who's being brought to the court. So we're not seeing a fairness and an equality in how people are treated before the courts. Why? Because that wouldn't allow them to come against what is the Constitution of Ireland. And so they're always looking for opportunities to come against the laws of this state, but to do so covertly, to do so under the radar, so that the general public don't see what they're doing is highly harmful to our Constitution and to our rights as Irish people. So now, instead of, a foreign country coming with the gun or the sword or the blade or whatever it is, now we have people in government coming against us with the pen by failing to comply with proper administrative procedures and protocols that are required of a legislator, proper procedures and administrative duties of a court that would see us held equal before the law. We're not seeing our rights being upheld, we're seeing our rights being waylaid, trampled and railroaded in court on the whims of a judge who chooses to submit to unlawful legislations instead of bring them to the attention of a higher court and seek certiorari himself. To lie into them and bring motion on the basis of them, even though it has come to his knowledge that there might be something iffy about them. Otherwise, why would he say, well, I have to assume that the higher courts and the legislators are doing right? Why would he have to assume that? Why does he have his own faculty in his own office if he just has to submit and do whatever he's told to do, just like a guard? The guard is held accountable for his conduct, just like a judge is held accountable for his conduct in accordance with the Constitution, not in accordance with adapted, amended or changed, augmented legislature. So what we're seeing now at the moment is a corruption, a perversion, and an attack by the pen against the rights of an Irish person. And people are so comfortable and sleepy, well fed and drunk and well clothed and comfortable that they don't even see the attack coming. And what they're doing now is they're trying to hide the attack. Let it be rebuked in Jesus' name. Let the devil be routed by the power of the blood of Yeshua. In Jesus' mighty name. Amen. Now, there are certain things that we can't ignore in society when our rights are being attacked and eroded, because that has a huge impact on our children. And how do you look them in the eye if you're not going to do anything about it? You're sailing them down the river to the waterfall, knowing that eventually it's going to fall over, that they're going to plummet to their death. You know it's coming, and you're just saying, well, it's not here yet, but it's coming. If you don't act when it presents, you're doing nothing and contributing to it, because you have knowledge and that you should do something about it and you're failing to. Therefore, you might as well be the one killing your child instead of dragging it out. There's no excuse for it. You can't play innocence and clean hands and at the same time do nothing about it. That doesn't give you impunity. It doesn't. You're still accountable. So, the matter is this. Stephen Talbot versus the DPP and the Attorney General, and now the Human Rights Commission are getting involved, playing amicus curiae for Latin and friend to the court for English. And, they're pointing out a few things that in the operation of the civil court at its initial stages were unlawful in about section 115 and 117. Now, this most certainly should be going on in both a criminal and civil capacity. They should be addressing what happened in the civil court in a civil court, but they should also be addressing what happened in the civil court in a criminal court. So that should actually be addressed in both courts. Why? Because if you act unlawfully in a civil court, you fall under the jurisdiction of and the certiorari of a criminal court, because you're breaking the law. You can't go against jurisdiction and not break the law. So that has to be investigated in a criminal jurisdiction as well as in a civil one. Why? How do you edify the civil court if you don't function within its frameworks? If you don't bring it to its attention. But at the same time, you must also simultaneously, which just means at the same time, come against that unlawful conduct in a criminal court. Unlawful conduct dealt with in a criminal court. Civil disagreement operated and dealt with in a civil court. What's wrong about guards summonsing people to civil court to have things looked at? They shouldn't be in the door. They shouldn't go through the door of the civil court. They've no place whatsoever in a civil jurisdiction. They most certainly do not have any right to play judge, jury and executioner and issue cease and desist orders at the side of the street, no matter what they call them, whether they call them adult behaviour warnings or not. They can't do it. And so when legislators legislate for this stuff, they're trying to basically give leeway to mobs. Mobs are groups of people that don't care about the law, they don't care about order, they conspire together, they get together and they go around with a pitchfork and they burn up and they trash anything they want to trash and bully people into joining the mob, joining their rhetoric and their agenda, which often changes because it's so disconnected and disjointed that they don't even know what they're after themselves and are just sort of becoming a reactive body that reacts to whatever, trample what it can and run from what it can't and trample the next thing it can. And that's what's basically happening. We're seeing a mob operating in that civil court, conspiring together, inciting guards to spearhead it and lead it out of their jurisdiction, to put themselves in a compromised position where they might actually be reprimanded and chastised and convicted of an offence should they continue to pursue that. Because now they're operating outside of their jurisdiction and they're falling under the law. They're breaking the law and they're actually being incited to by politicians who legislate. So now we have politicians breaking the law, inciting members of An Garda Síochána to go against their jurisdiction, making amendments to the Criminal Justice Act. Now I ask you, what involvement has the Criminal Justice Act in the civil court? The Criminal Justice Act is limited to the criminal courts. It has nothing to do with the conduct and the carry-on of the civil courts. Let's make a very clear distinction here. Civil jurisdiction, criminal jurisdiction, two different jurisdictions. Members of An Garda Síochána can operate in criminal jurisdiction. They can't operate in civil jurisdiction. Anybody who tries to tell them they can is now inciting crime. Doesn't matter if you're a politician, legislator or whatever, or a high court judge, you're coming against the laws of the land and you're therefore coming into an area of reprimand where you should be chastised for what you've done. At least because it can be seen as high treason, because it can be seen as a betrayal of your country, the one you're claiming to represent and have the interests of. When you're coming against the rights of the individual, when the guard is saying, you're not breaking the law, but we have a big problem there. Because if you're not breaking the law, you should be left to continue not breaking it. And not interfered with on a habitual, systematic basis. Because that becomes organised harassment. Becomes repetitive harassment. It becomes a system of harassment. Because you're telling me on the one hand, I'm not breaking the law, and on the other hand you're telling me I should stop doing what's not breaking the law. You don't have that authority. So there shouldn't be any apprehension of chastisement or penalty, or you in any way encroaching on my space or on my time, bringing me through this administrative process or that, or this process of court or that, because you've told me I'm not breaking the law. So there's a disconnect. If I'm not breaking the law, why are you breaking the law to bring me into a civil court? If I'm not breaking the law, why are you breaking the law to bring me into a civil court? Again, if I'm not breaking the law, why are you breaking the law to bring me into a civil court, telling me that I should stop doing what isn't breaking the law? Antisocial behaviour doesn't cover anything that's lawful. Something that's lawful cannot be simultaneously considered antisocial. Now that's just dealing with Section 113, 114, 115 and 117 of the Criminal Justice Act 2006, but there are more matters to be dealt with that they're trying to avoid. The one, namely, is Section 7 of the Criminal Justice Public Order Act 1994, which uses the word insulting, which is far too vague and subjective, which means that one person would be insulted by what you're saying and another person wouldn't. Well, we can't have laws that are subject to subjectivity. We can't have laws that are based upon merely opinion, which is changeable. Because you couldn't have two judges dealing in the court in the same way. If they were allowed to act on their opinions, their feelings, their mood and their beliefs on that day, and another judge would do the same, and they would be judging an identical case and coming up with a different conclusion. You can't have opportunity for that. You can't have an opportunity for two judges to come to a different conclusion if they're both complying with and applying the laws rightly. You can't have that. You can't have two judges having different conclusions. We have a serious problem then. Well, then you might say, well, how can you appeal a process then? Aren't you banking on two judges having different opinions? No, what you're banking on is one judge doing the job right. Actually complying with the laws and submitting to the laws. That's why we have the higher courts. So what you're trying to do is expose that the judge of the lower court hasn't complied with the laws. And we've already shown that. The High Court agreed with that. They quashed the convictions that the lower courts formed against me. They quashed them. And now the government are trying to have those overturned and overthrown. They're still coming after my life. They're making these applications to the Court of Appeal a month and 4 days late. No extension for an application to appeal was sought, yet they were granted it. Don't you think that that's highly suspect? That now the Court of Appeal in our country is trying to deal, number one, with criminal matters in a civil jurisdiction. Now themselves displaying that they're willing also to break jurisdiction, along with the guards and the legislators who first attempted to do so. Not only that, but they don't consider our administrative procedures and protocols and processes as worthy of their compliance, so that they don't even seek the state to apply within the time frames and time constraints that the court sets and applies. There are time limits placed on the amount of time that is allowed to pass before somebody applies for an appeal. I was told by my then counsel, who I've since dismissed because they haven't been competent, because they didn't tell me about things in a timely fashion so I could respond to them, namely that the judge abandoned the testing of section 115 and 117 in the High Court. They never told me about that until the conclusion of the court was made and arrived at, until it was actually published on courts.ie. Do you see how corrupt they are? Yet we know that in order to make an application for an appeal, once you've gone over the time limit, you have to first apply for an extension to appeal. Problem is, if you've already passed the final day where you could have made that appeal, and the final hearing was had, and your opportunity to make your appeal was then, a month and 4 days passes, and then you make your appeal, without even applying for an extension to appeal, corruption is exposed in the courts. Because now you have a Court of Appeal, the highest level courts, accepting appeals a month and 4 days late without any application for an extension to appeal. This is highly corrupt. They're not even submitting to the administrative procedures and protocols of the court anymore. Even at the highest level, they don't see them as worthy of being complied with, and they don't see themselves as having to comply with what the average Joe would have to comply with. Cases are won and lost on this basis. People are prevented from making appeals simply because they have been late in doing so. Yet the court think they can allow this willy-nilly. Why is it? Just because the state are doing it? Are the state allowed to fail to comply with what the citizen is expected and must lawfully comply with? We are seeing big corruption in our day. Guards have been incited to offend the laws and their office and the rights of the citizens of Ireland by getting involved in civil matters. Legislators are breaking the law, in amending legislatures, claiming that in some way the Criminal Justice Act has any say over what occurs in a civil matter, in a civil jurisdiction. They don't. Note, it's the Criminal Justice Act 2006. Why are they using a criminal act to govern proceedings in a civil court? That makes no sense. And so they're exposed. They're trying to use an act of the criminal court to tell guards what they can do in civil courts. That doesn't take a lot of wits, guys, to know that that's wrong. Civil jurisdiction, criminal jurisdiction. Guards have no jurisdiction in civil court. They know that. yet a superintendent of An Garda Síochána is trying to prosecute whoever he wants in the civil court, without any solid irrefutable evidence or without being connected to any of the evidence himself. Any of the adult behaviour warnings. And by the way, the adult behaviour warnings incite conspiracy because the adult behaviour warnings were not actually issued by the same guard. They were issued by a number of different guards on different days for different reasons. Why are they choosing to compile these against the individual? That's showing bias. It's showing conspiratorial effort along with those who are complaining about you. It's showing a conspiracy. It's showing a mob mechanism. And now we have politicians legislating for that. So the courts have broken the law. The legislator has broken the law. The guards have broken the law. The judges have broken the law. The solicitors have broken the law in so many places now that it is a pirate ship. They're all over the place making a mess. And now they want to involve the Human Rights and Equality Commission. Will they submit to what they say and not the constitution of the country? Why should we expect that they'll listen to reason from anybody when they haven't done it up till now, when they haven't complied with the laws, when they haven't even complied with jurisdiction? Why would you expect them to start listening to bureaucratic committees? Why? They don't care about the law. They've exhibited that. They're still trying to blur the lines between jurisdictions. Oh yeah, we're going to deal with that in the civil appeal in the Court of Appeal, the highest level. We're going to deal with criminal convictions in the civil jurisdiction. They're still mocking. No, but we're actually trying to deal with the 115 and 117 of what? Of the Criminal Justice Act. That's the criminal court. Criminal, civil, criminal, civil, criminal, civil. They're exposed before they get going. The Criminal Justice Act 2006 has no remit in the civil court. It can't instruct the behaviours that are carried out in a civil court. Do you see the corruption? They're all over the gaff, hoping that people just get so confused that they'll just kind of go wither like a flower out of season. Guys, these people are not complying with the laws of this land, not complying with the Constitution. They're not even complying with basic administrative procedures of the court. At this stage, the guy who cleans the court would probably do a better job. It is, and he doesn't even have to know the law, just apply common sense and he'd do a better job than them. It's an absolute mockery. Let them be rebuked in Jesus' name. The word insulting has no place in law because it cannot be defined in law. Because they would have to come up with one definition of the word insulting which would remove its subjectivity. Insulting applies specifically to, and then they would be exposed in their agenda because they would show who they're targeting and they would show who they're trying to protect, thereby foregoing an equal ground and platform for all people. And they have to try and perceive and be perceived as though they're doing it for everybody's interests, trying to make it better for everybody. No, they're not. The word insulting in a similar act in other jurisdictions, you have to ask, why are they having such similar acts in different jurisdictions? Because it's a move of a central global elitist fraternity called Freemasonry. And they're trying to use their contacts in government to implement these legislatures all at the same time, all throughout the earth. But other jurisdictions have said, no, insulting's far too vague, you can't have it. And they've removed it. America and England, I think, to name two, have removed the word insulting from legislature because it's far too vague. Well, if other jurisdictions have done it, why are these guys convicting a preacher of the gospel on the basis of it? I was the first person to ever be convicted taking into account Section 7 of the Criminal Justice Public Order Act 1994, ever convicted in Ireland, when it was brought into effect, they say, to control drunkenness. But how do I know that? It was brought into effect under the Intoxicating Liquor Act. And it was initially supposed to govern what happened between 12 midnight and 7 a.m. in the morning. How many preachers are out at that time? That's to govern drunks. That's why it was brought in under the Intoxicating Liquor Act. One might say, well, I was walking home with my wife, and this man came over and he was rather insulting to the two of us, and he was abusing my wife. He was being abusive. He was saying he was going to do lewd things to her, to do rude things to her. Well, that's called obscenity. He can be arrested. He's being obscene. Therefore, he can be arrested. Obscenity is something of a lewd, salacious nature, an inappropriately and an overtly sexual nature. And we have laws against that. So the point I'm making to you guys is there's no such thing as antisocial behaviour that's lawful. There's only antisocial behaviour that's unlawful. What can we deduce then? We can deduce that you can only have an antisocial behaviour order against somebody who's broken the law, and that has to be decided by a court of law as to whether they've broken the law or not. So you can't go into the civil court having assumed that somebody has broken the law if it's foregone due process of law. So do you see how they're trying to sidestep and bypass proper function of our courts by telling guards to go operate in the civil court there, where nobody's watching? It's hideous, guys. They're not complying with the laws of the land. They're not even getting the basics right. The guard has to presume I'm innocent. How can he do that? How can he tell me I'm not breaking the law, presume I'm innocent, and tell me I have to stop doing something because Mary doesn't like what I said? Or Joe or Jack or anybody. Do you see the point? So the guard can't tell me to stop doing something simply because he doesn't like what I said. It has to go into a category that has been defined as unlawful. And so a man going up and saying, I like your missus there, and starts talking inappropriately about his beloved wife, is acting in a way that is antisocial. Why? Because it's unlawful. Why? Because it's obscene. So there are only two things that are considered antisocial behaviour in terms of speech. And that is, or even a sign you would hold up. And they are matters that, or forms of expression, whatever the form of media or the medium, that expressions that can be considered lewd, salacious, or pornographic. Excuse me. So if it's not inappropriately sexual, it's not considered lewd. If it's not pornographic, if it's not descriptive of sexual acts and things like that, what I will do, what I'd like to do, all this kind of stuff and lewdness, then it can't be considered obscene. Obscenity can be considered also inappropriate nakedness. We have a wording in Ireland that's called indecent exposure. And so that breaks the laws as well. So there are certain things that one can do in his conduct that can be considered antisocial because it's against the law to do them. They can't be considered antisocial if it's lawful to do them. So if it's lawful to preach the gospel, it can't be considered antisocial. If it's lawful to have an anti-pro-abortion worldview, opinion, belief, and express it, then it's not antisocial to do the same. And if anybody was ever able to come out and hold up a sign with graphic imagery of an abortion, which they are regularly allowed to do, it can't be considered antisocial to stand there and say, I don't agree with abortion. God hates murder, and I believe abortion is murder. I'm within my rights to say that. Whether there was somebody walking by who had an abortion or not and felt insulted by it, that doesn't matter in terms of the law, whether they were insulted by it or not. Even though currently one would consider that it's lawful to have an abortion in Ireland, one might consider that. I don't. I think they broke the law bringing the referendum. because you can't bring a referendum to remove a right that is God-given, such as the right to life. You're only creating a facade. You're creating a false position to lead people to destruction through ignorance, to incite them to do harm against their own human beings, their own offspring, through ignorance and through rhetoric and agenda. Convincing language is what rhetoric means. Convincing speech, do this because da 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 da. All that manipulation of expression, inflection of voice, convincing tones and things. That's all witchcraft that the devil uses through media to convince people that abortion is good. When we Christians come out and we say, no, you're breaking the law. You cannot remove an imprescriptible right because it's imprescriptible. That means it can't be taken out of the law or can't be overwritten in the law. It's imprescriptible, cannot be removed from the text. It is a right given by God. The Americans used the terms self-evident and God-given. Which means if Ireland didn't give your baby its life, it can't remove it by referendum. And so it was acknowledged in 1983 by whoever in the Irish Constitution that they acknowledged the equal right to life of the mother and the preborn baby in the womb. Okay, you acknowledged it. That meant it existed prior to your acknowledgement. Why? Because it was antecedent. Antecedent means it came before your awareness of it. So all you were doing in 1983 was acknowledging it. Okay, well, if you're acknowledging it, that's fine. But why were you acknowledging it? They wanted to call it into the thinking of the public because it was something that was shelved. We just know that. We just know you shouldn't be killing your babies. Well, we have to bring it back into the public consciousness if we're going to start telling them that they should want to kill them. We can't get them to kill their babies if they're not thinking about such a thing. Just like we can't get them to be racist if we're not telling them that we're against racism. So the point is that there are certain things, certain ways that they use, that those who are against proper order in society and would incite the society to doing harm, like witchcraft covens and wizard covens and lodges like Freemasonry and the likes, and Eastern Star, Job's Daughters, Dean Mole, and the list goes on, servants of the devil, the synagogues of Satan. When they try to go into the governments and things and legislate for this, that, and the other thing, they're doing so to harmful effect because they want you to basically not comply with the law because you're in such a degree of deception and such a degree of ignorance, just not knowing the law, in other words, that you're just going to do harmful things when they tell you to do them. And tell you that you're not breaking the law, go on ahead, you're not breaking the law. Yeah, is that what you want to do? Okay, just tick the box. Right, grand, that was a referendum, now it's okay to kill your baby. It's never okay to kill your baby. Who says it's okay to kill your baby? The government brought a referendum. So what? They committed high treason when they brought the referendum. Why? What do you mean? That's a strong accusation. Yeah, it is. Because I believe it to be absolutely true. And the point I'm making that statement is because I can prove it. Because the right to life is an imprescriptible right that the baby in the womb has. If it ever had it, it means that nobody in government can bring a referendum to remove it. Why? Because the nature of the right to life, which was acknowledged in 1983, is one that is imprescriptible, antecedent, inviolable, inalienable, and all of those mean it can't be taken away by the law. So let it be rebuked in Jesus' name. Pro-abortion is just another way of saying, kill your baby. That's all it is. So when I come out and I say, this is the point, when I come out and I say I'm against abortion, you can't tell me I'm behaving antisocially. Are you saying on the one hand it's socially acceptable to bludgeon your baby to death, pull its head and legs off while it's in your beloved wife's womb, but in some way I'm being harmful by telling you I don't believe you should be doing that? That I'm being antisocial? Or I'm being antisocial because I don't believe or agree with same-sex marriage as a Christian, and I believe that it's actually breaking the laws of the land of Ireland because it goes against God's commands. And the preamble of the Irish Constitution says, in the name of the Most Holy Trinity. from and to whom as our final end all actions both of men and states must be referred. How can you tell me that my being in agreement with God, my being in agreement with the Irish Constitution, is my behaving in an antisocial manner? It says, we the people of Eire humbly acknowledge all our obligations to our divine Lord Jesus Christ. Well, when I come out and tell you what Jesus would command, how can that be considered as antisocial when it's completely in agreement with the preamble, foundation of the Irish Constitution? There's a big disconnect there. It's not antisocial to disagree with Islam, and it's not racist either. That's nonsense. Islam is not a race. There are Muslims in all different types of countries, from all different tribal or ethnical backgrounds. Ethnic backgrounds, all different ethnicities. And so the point is that it's not a race, it's not a skin colour or a DNA, it's a worldview, it's a belief system. So when I come out and I say I don't agree with Islam, it would only be pure ignorance to say that on the basis of that I'm being racist. And that's why I was accused of being racist in the local newspapers here. That was the reasoning. But when the woman who said I was behaving in a racist manner was asked to give the court a reason as to why, she said I can't. She was incapable of presenting evidence in the way of proving me a racist. Yet it ended up in the newspapers that I was, and they alluded to a judgment that was against me, deeming me homophobic and racist, when there was no evidence presented in court. And do you know how they sidestep this, guys? The way the papers sidestep it is they put quotations either side of it. So what they're saying is, we're not saying this, we're just repeating what somebody else said. So this is how they try to avoid libel. The problem is, what they do is they fail to add context. They don't do that by mistake. They fail to add context. They fail to say somebody said that he was homophobic and racist, but that they didn't bring evidence to that effect. Oh no, don't say that. Just put homophobic and racist in big quotation marks on the front page or the second page or wherever it is, so we can colour this guy antisocial. So we can colour this guy a certain way in the newspapers so that people will side with us. We'll call him the Rapunzel of the Bullring. That's what they called me in the newspaper and in the court. They said it in court so that it could end up in the newspaper. So that the newspaper could just say, well, we were just writing what was said in the court, and avoid libel charges. You see how they operate now? But the court judge must disallow people from uttering things in the court that they can't prove. And the judge didn't ask that lady to take back what she has said in the absence of her being able to prove it. Sorry, you'll have to retract that statement officially before the court because you can't bring evidence to prove it. You're after making a claim there that this man is racist, and you're also after stating that you absolutely cannot prove it or have any evidence whatsoever to present to the court other than you're calling him racist. So you're not allowed to do that, and we have to uphold that man's good name now. There's a chance that what you said might be published, so you'll have to retract that statement. None of that was done. That would have been proper conduct of the court, and it wasn't done. No evidence was ever produced to say that I had behaved in a racist manner. None. I'm not talking about solid irrefutable evidence. I'm saying there was none given. Just the accusation and the allegation made. No evidence given. And an allegation is just an allegation. It cannot be considered as truth. It cannot be printed in newspapers. And it has to be said in the newspaper, this is only an allegation that wasn't substantiated in court. So the newspaper, by omission, have harmed my reputation in this community, and I've done nothing about repairing it. Nothing. Nor the courts. Yet the courts found it fitting to accept an appeal to the convictions a month and 4 days late, without any extension to apply for, without any application for an extension to appeal. More clearly stated. So the point is this: if the court has to comply with jurisdiction, so do the police. If the police have to comply with jurisdiction, they can't be getting involved in civil matters. They can't, guys. They've no jurisdiction in civil court, so there can't be summons and people there. This should be very simple. Who legislated this? The High Court should say. Bring them in. This can't stand. Members of An Garda Síochána cannot get involved in civil matters. Anything that would purport to afford them the ability to do so has to be removed. Remove it. Remove it from the legislature. You can't have guards playing judge and jury and executioner on the side of the street, picking and choosing who they're going to side with, and then getting involved in civil matters where they've no jurisdiction on the basis of a complaint in the complete absence of solid irrefutable evidence. Bring in that legislation. Have it removed. You cannot have the word insulting being the mechanism for the criminalisation of a person who is well within their rights to express their opinions and beliefs, whether somebody's insulted by them or not. Now, it would be different if you happened to be insulted by something that was obscene. Why? Because the laws govern obscenity. They actually have a definition for obscenity. You can't behave in a way that is obscene against people. Why? Because we have to protect the ears of the children. We have to protect the society. We've got to ensure that evil and disrespectful, dishonouring and harmful speech is not being uttered in that way and leading our children to degrees of debauchery. Well, somebody might say, well, what if I don't want my children to hear about your opinions and beliefs? Well, sorry, you don't have the right to prevent your children from hearing my worldview. You don't actually have that. You do have the right to prevent your children from hearing obscenity. And obscenity is very specifically defined in law. Lewd, salacious material. Very specific definition. So there are only two things that are considered an offence in terms of speech with respect to freedom of expression, with respect to what one might actually say in a public place. When does it become antisocial? It only becomes antisocial when it's unlawful. It can't be both. It can't be both social and unlawful. It can't be both antisocial and lawful. Do you see the point? So if a guard is telling me I'm behaving within my rights and behaving lawfully, he cannot bring a charge against me saying I've behaved antisocially. It's only when he can say you're behaving unlawfully that he can attempt to bring a charge against me saying I'm antisocial. Because he has had to physically reprimand me because I've uttered obscenities or walked naked. What does that prove? It proves that the guard had a position on the basis of obscenity, the utterance of obscenity. But if he hasn't got that, he has nothing. And he certainly can't go about that in a civil court. He would have to go about that in a criminal court. So the terminologies antisocial should have nothing to do with civil court. Because their remit is in the criminal court. Do you see how they're trying to use the civil court to give criminal context to something on the mere basis that somebody didn't comply with a civil order? Well, if you brought a civil order into place, it must be on the basis that somebody's broken the law. You can't be telling people that they can't do things if they haven't broken the law. Just like you can't be telling them they're acting antisocially if they're complying with the law. That's a disconnect. That's nonsense. So we can't be allowing nonsense in our legislature. And that's why it's been brought before the High Court. But the High Court failed to test it, showing that there was an unwillingness to do so. But at the same time, they showed a willingness to hear what the state said, even though they applied a month and 4 days late and didn't even apply for an extension to appeal. They made an appeal a month and 4 days late, and the civil court of appeal said, yay, we'll do that. Corruption, corruption, corruption afoot. Let the devil be rebuked in Yeshua's name. Blessings.